The first organ system we cover is the integumentary system, which we commonly call the skin. A lot of people do not realize that the skin is in fact an organ system and not just tissue. When we look at the skin, however, it's an organ system, but instead of being made up of organs, it is made up of glands. And with glands, glands are similar to organs, except they are not made of multiple tissues. Instead, we have a particular type of tissue doing just a singular function, but in one location. The combining form for glands is adeno. For skin, we have several combining forms, and they are all used interchangeably: cutaneo, dermo, and dermato. We have one new suffix, and it's the only new suffix in this chapter, and that is the suffix derma. And you have to be very careful with the spelling here. Derma is a suffix. If you would be asked to build a term involving the skin, and you would use derma by accident as a combining form, and you're going to misspell it because now you're going to have an A instead of an O. So please be careful with that. As far as the skin goes, there are several functions, the first of which is to be our barrier. This is what separates us from everything in the environment, and we get protection against certain things in the environment, like bacteria and viruses that are all over the place, the harmful rays of the sun, namely the UV rays, and of course from physical injury that can occur. We also use the skin as a means of temperature regulation to keep us from overheating. One of the ways we do that is perspiration. When you are releasing sweat onto your skin, the temperature of the environment and your skin together is sufficient to boil that water off, releasing all of that energy inside to the environment, which will cool you down considerably. We also have sensory perception here, meaning the sense of touch and pressure. In our skin, touch receptors, almost everybody knows about that, but pressure as well. If you've ever dove into a deep end of a swimming pool and you go down to 12 feet, you will feel the pressure on your skin. Metabolism is the other function of this system, and that's going to be involved in things like producing vitamin D, which we do from UV light in the environment. So UV light can be harmful, but it's also needed for us to produce vitamin D. The skin has three layers that we're going to focus on. The first layer is called the epidermis. Now this is the outermost layer. Now when you look at this tissue layer, the skin layer I should say, it's made up of mostly dead cells, and there's no combining form, but I'm going to give you one, and that is epidermal. If you tried to break this term down, for example, if we had a term that was epidermitis, and you tried to break it into three components because we don't use the combining form epidermo, it would not make any sense. It would actually define as inflammation above the skin, which doesn't make any sense whatsoever, since inflammation must be of tissues, not above them. So here, epidermal is the combining form we're going to use. Now, the skin itself on this layer is made up of overlapping cells of squamous epithelium, and squamous cells are very scale-like. What happens is that they lose their nucleus as they move up from the basal layer to the top. And since there are many layers, we use the term stratified to describe that. The nice thing about this is that since these are literally layers of dead cells, when they are sloughed off, and they are done so throughout the day, it's to help protect you, by the way. Anything that's on those cells gets removed. It's not going to endanger you when they're lost because they are dead, and we can replace them as underlying cells. Now, the combining form for squamous is squamo. When we look at these cells as they migrate up from the basal layer, and you can see this in the picture, you'll notice that the nucleus is lost. And when it is removed, of course, that will kill the cell. But we also now fill the cytoplasm with keratin. That's why we say the cells are keratinized. Now, keratin is a protein, and it makes these cells harder than they once were. So kerато is a combining form that can mean hard. It can also mean keratin, the protein used in this process. The basal layer is the living layer of this tissue, and it's here that we see all the cells having a nucleus. And it's these cells that the nucleus is removed from during the keratinization process as they migrate upward. The most important of these cells are those at the base that you can see that contain black pigment. These are called melanocytes. The combining for melano means black. Now this pigment is going to be what absorbs UV light, protecting you from the dangers of UV light. Also in these layers, we're going to find parts of the nails. Now this is where it gets a little bit tricky with nails and hair, because the actual living portion is down in the dermis, But the non-living portion of nails and hair extends through the epidermis. Now, a lot of people don't realize that the outermost part that we see of your nails and your hair is dead. That's why you can cut your hair or cut your nails and you don't scream in the process. However, if we pulled your hair out or your nails out, you would, because now the living portions are being removed. Now, with nails, we have two combining forms, and once again, these are interchangeable, unguo and onycho. For the hair, the two combining forms are pilo and tricho, and these two are interchangeable. So with all of these, my suggestion is always use the one you can spell. The dermis is considered the living layer of the skin. Now, we already talked about the fact that hair and nails are going to originate here and then extend through the epidermis, but it's here in the dermal layer that the living portions are found. When we look at the dermis, we're going to see a whole bunch of glands in here as well as blood vessels to support this living tissue. The sweat gland is the first of these. Now, sweat glands, the combining form is hydro. And when we look at these glands, they're going to secrete water as well as certain electrolytes, salt being the big one, sodium and chloride, directly to the skin surface. Now, this is twofold. Number one, that fluid is going to help to cool your body as it boils off. Also, the salt is there to protect you from microorganisms because most microorganisms do not like salt to the point that it will actually kill them. We also have the sebaceous glands. Now, the sebaceous glands, the combining form is sebo, which refers to the sebum, the oil that they secrete. Skin has got to be maintained. If it cracks open, it loses its ability to be a barrier, and that's a real problem since all of the outermost tissue layers are dead. So we secrete this oil to keep it lubricated and from cracking, and that is why in the winter time, or if you're working a job such as nursing where you're washing your hands constantly, that oil is lost and the skin will crack open, and now you're open to infection. So we have to make sure we maintain that outer surface, and the sebum does that. But the difference is, unlike sweat, it's not secreted to the surface of the skin, but through the hair follicle. That's why hair can sometimes get oily, and that's why we wash it. When you look here at this diagram, it's showing you both the epidermis and the dermis as the two coexist. I won't make you know a diagram for this exam. The reason for that is because they're done in color and we can't print them in color. And when you try to print them off in black and white, they don't work as well. The other thing we're going to see in this layer, as you can see, are the blood vessels. So keep that in mind that we do supply blood here, and that's why if you cut deep enough, you will bleed when this area is damaged. The last layer is called the subcutaneous layer, also sometimes known as the hypocutaneous layer. So here are sometimes the hypodermal layer. The subcutaneous layer is where we find fat underneath. Now, you have to understand when we look at fat, we refer to this type of tissue as adipose. Os here meaning the suffix full of. So this literally is full of fat. Now the fat here is not to insulate you like many people think. Insulation is what's done with brown fat, and humans don't have brown fat. We have yellow fat. So it's there mostly to protect you, and it's also there as a means of storage of energy. When we need energy and we need it from storage, we take it out of fat. Our body resists using fat unless we absolutely have to, but it's here that it's stored directly under the skin. There's some other combining forms that you're going to need to know as well. When we look at those combining forms, I'm going to list them all here and then go through them with you. Albino. Albino is a combining form that means white. Caudaro means burn. And don't confuse that with causal, which means burning. So the two are very similar but not the same. Cryo is cold. Diaphoro is profuse sweating. Erythro means red. Erythemo means redness. Ichthyo means fish-like. And leuco means white. Lipo is another combining form for fat. This one is going to be used more for looking at a condition that we'll see later on, not looking at the tissue that makes it up. We use adipo for that. Macro means large. Myco means fungus. Ridido means wrinkle. Pachyo means thick, and it gets its name for the pachyderms, which are elephants, because they have the thickest skin on the planet. Phago, which means to swallow. Pyo, which means pus. Sclero, which means hard. Striato, which is another combining form for fat. Now, we won't use that one too much in regard to the skin, but it will come up when we get to the digestive system. I went ahead and added it here so you can see all three of the combining forms that can mean fat. When we're looking at adipo, lipo, and now steato. Xantho means yellow, and xero means dry. Now here are some terms we're going to break down and define, and you can see them listed here. Now on the next slide, I go through each one of these, so please try to do that on your own before you go to that slide. Now you're also going to have to look at some of the things in this chapter. Number one are all the pathological terms. When you go into your text, they are all listed, and as you go through them, they show you their definition by way of fill-in-the-blank types of questions that they have you work on. You'll need to know those because I will put those pathological conditions, those terms, on the multiple choice section of your first exam. I will also list all the symptoms, abnormality, and conditions in both parts 1 and 2 that are presented in the same way. Now, in the lab shell, I've got some photos that I've posted that you can look at in regard to those terms to help you get a visual of what they're about. For many of you that are visual learners, that can be very helpful in your process. The last thing is looking at the surgical terms, because now, not only are in this chapter, we don't have a whole lot of clinical procedures that we do on the skin. We might grow some fungus up, for example, or we might do, a little bit of a skin analysis. But most of the things we're going to do are going to be by way of treatment, and that's where surgery comes in. And once we look at these abnormalities and we decide what it is, many times it's something that has to be surgically removed, either through using traditional surgery or some other means. So that's why you must know the surgical terms as well. For all of these, I will put them into the multiple choice section on an exam. So you won't see them on a quiz unless it's a form that you can break down and define it that way. So you won't be given the bold-faced definition that you see in your text for this term. Instead, I'll expect you to break it down and define it using the components as we do other terms. Cautery is broken down into cautereau and the suffix y. The suffix y means process or condition. So here, cautery is the process of burning. Very often when we cut somebody surgically, we use a laser now. And the beauty of it is when it does that, it will burn the blood vessels, so that will sear them and shut them off so you don't bleed internally. Causalgia. Causo means burning, algia means pain. So by definition, this is a burning pain. Now, folks, think of this when you've had a sunburn. You're not physically on fire, but you can feel that burning sensation. That's what it's referring to. Cryosurgery. Now, this is the type of surgery where we're going to use cryo, cold. So here we're going to use something like liquid hydrogen and put it onto some type of a growth, usually some type of a neoplasm, a new growth, or even sometimes polyps, etc. Freeze them so solid that you can flake them off. Diaphoresis. Diaphoro means profuse sweating. Osis, as we already know, means abnormal condition. So this would be a normal condition of profuse sweating. Someone that is diabetic will have diaphorosis, this profuse sweating, when they sit in a cold room. So this is something definitely abnormal. Erythroderma. Erythro means red, derma means skin. So this is red skin. Now this may be due to a burn. It may be due to a certain disease that we'll see as we go through those conditions. But here we're just looking at the skin itself being red. Erythromatous. Now this is very similar because here we see erythema meaning redness. So here you see OUS or ATOUS, which refers to pertaining to. So it's not looking at the red color of the skin, but necessarily the red color of what we're looking at on the skin. Ichthyosis is one of the really nasty conditions that you can see. I did not put any pictures in, but you can look those up on the internet to see. It happens when ichthyo, fish-like, osis abnormal condition, we see the skin coming off in huge scales. So this is one definitely go look up for yourself. Leukoderma. Derma means skin. Leuko means white. So here we see white skin. Now this is not referring to skin color looking at it in a sociological form. We're talking about white colorings of the skin. Some people call that leukoplakia. This can be early indications of skin cancer. Lipogenesis. Lipo we already know means fat. Genesis means formation. So this is the formation of fat. Macroscopy or macroscopy. Macro means large. Scopy means the process of viewing. So when we want to see large things, that's what we're talking about. And the beauty of this is that you don't need to use a microscope. Most of the time, it's just the naked eye, or even using something like a single lens magnifying glass. Trichomycosis. When you look at this term, it is very tricky because there's two combining forms, and you can see they're held together by a vowel, but the vowel is dropped when you add the suffix because the suffix begins with a vowel. So when we break it down, here's what we see. Tricho means hair. Myco means fungus, so this is an abnormal condition of hair fungus. Pachyderma. Pachy means thick. Derma means skin. So this literally means thick skin, but it is a really horrific condition. The skin gets so thick that you're unable to move your fingers and toes. The digits, it becomes almost impossible to move. And the skin being so thick starts to crack and split open. So this is one of those conditions that is not something you want. Phagocytopenia. Now we're talking about this here because the skin is your barrier and underneath we do have protection. However, it's going to be more important when we get into chapter 13 and talk about the protection of the lymphatic system. Here we see penia, which means deficiency. Phago means to swallow. So this is a deficiency of the swallowing cells. Scleroderma. When you look here, there's derma once more, which means skin. Sclero means hard. Technically means hard skin. Not much different than pachyderma, just not as thick. But as you look at some of those pictures, you're going to see when the skin gets so hard, it's going to keep you from being able to move your digits. Xanthoderma. Xantho means yellow, so now we see yellow skin. Now, folks, this is what happens when there's an abnormal condition, mostly involving the liver, and you'll see people that have jaundice, and it's first noticed on the skin and in the whites of the eyes. Xeroderma. Now, xero means dry, derma means skin, so this is dry skin. Now, this could be just a natural occurrence. Hey, it may be in the wintertime and the skin's drying out. Or it may be because you've overwashed your hands, or it may be even a condition where you're not getting the sebaceous glands to secrete like they're supposed to. Albinism. Ism means condition. Albino means white. So this is a condition of white. And when we say white, we don't mean white in the sense of skin color, the way we do it sociologically, looking at Caucasian versus different looks. But here we're talking about when there is a lack of pigment. And somebody that is undergoing this condition of albinism, it is not something easy to overcome. Without that pigment, you can't absorb light in your eyes because your eyes have kind of a red tinge. Also, without that pigment, you don't have protection against UV light. It's very difficult to see at night as well. Rhytidectomy. Now, when you look at this one, it is the surgical removal of wrinkles. Now, one of the things we're going to see in other classes that you take, wrinkles today are removed by using the world's most lethal poison called Botox, which is botulism toxin. It is the strongest toxin on the planet, and people will use that to rid themselves of wrinkles. In the old days, we used to do a surgical removal, as we talked about here. Some people call that, the tightening of the face or a face lift, because by tightening the skin, the wrinkles, it kind of stretches it out the skin, so the wrinkles go away. Pyoderma. Now, this can happen when you have an infection. Pyo means pus, derma means skin. So when we see pus in the skin, now it might be on the skin once it erupts, but it's going to be in the skin where the infection is occurring.